Huh. Almost $5,000.
Still, building a game computer is way too expensive right now. Due to recent economic developments, building a new computer might be a bit out of reach for now. And an increasing amount of AAA titles that require beefier graphics cards. How easy or how hard is it to build a good budget system? How much of your budget do you need to put into your GPU? What about your motherboard, CPU, and RAM? Can you get a modern GPU, slap it in a 10-year-old system, and expect good results?
Well, that's exactly what I did. Today, we're going to be testing out an 11-year-old HP Z440 workstation and putting it to work by seeing how it holds up against modern games. Our GPU of choice is an RTX 4060. The 4060 is a great 1080p card, and it'll allow our Z440 to run with no bottlenecks at all. Now, even though we're using a PCIe Gen 4 card, our system is limited to only PCIe Gen 3, meaning we won't be getting our 4060's full performance. Although the Z440 is a great PC in its own right, the one we're testing is just built different. In order to give it a better chance against AAA titles, we needed to take care of a few things first. For storage, we're slapping a fast NVMe drive as opposed to a hard disk or a SATA drive. Secondly, we're replacing its puny CPU cooler and putting in a dual-towered behemoth powered by 3 120mm fans. Since we have a 4060 in here, of course we need a new power supply as well. And to top it all off, we gave our geriatric beast the most powerful processor it can handle. A 12-core Xeon processor that can boost all the way up to 3.5 GHz. Oh, and the complete kit swap for even more cooling and some aesthetics as well. To get a sense of how a more up-to-date CPU would handle, we'll be putting our Xeon processor up against a much more modern Ryzen 5700X. They'll both be running on the RTX 4060. This will keep the comparison solely on the CPU, motherboard, and RAM. But wait, what about the other components? Needless to say, there's a lot more that goes into a PC's performance than just its CPU and graphics card. To get a better understanding of what exactly we're comparing, here's a quick side-by-side of each major component. Now with all that out of the way, let's compare some CPUs. And we're starting off strong with Doom 2016. So Doom released about the same time as our Xeon CPU, so strong performance was expected. However, what was not expected was our Xeon CPU going almost frame for frame with our Ryzen CPU. In 1080p Ultra, both CPUs were within 10 frames of each other in both average frame rates and 1% lows. Even the 0.1% lows were within 2 frames of each other. However, when bumping up to 1440p, the Ryzen 5700X took no performance hit. However, our Xeon CPU definitely took a bit of a nosedive. Still, 146 average frame rate at 1440p is definitely beyond playable. In Red Dead Redemption 2, the frame rate is nearly identical in both benchmark tests. Both CPUs averaged exactly 92 frames per second using the in-game benchmark. In 1440p, the difference is very minute. Both CPUs averaged above 60 FPS in this case. So far, there hasn't been any meaningful difference between either CPU.
And now, you might be thinking, what's the point in upgrading if an older CPU works just fine? And fair question. Now, here's the thing, those games we just looked at, they're not really CPU intensive, they're more GPU intensive, so an older CPU or a weaker CPU might not make much of a difference.
But that's going to change with Microsoft Flight Simulator. In Flight Sim, our Xeon CPU gets destroyed in both 1080p and 1440p. This is because Flight Sim is a very CPU intensive task. Now, the reason you don't see much of a frame rate change going from 1080p to 1440p is because the CPU is the bottleneck in both systems. In other words, it's not the GPU that's holding them back, it's the CPU. You can really see this again in Spider-Man Remastered. At 1080p Ultra settings, the more modern Ryzen CPU pulls nearly double the FPS compared to the old Xeon. Turn on ray tracing and that gap gets even wider. Ryzen hits over 2.5 times the frames. At 1440p, it doesn't get much better for the Xeon. With ray tracing enabled, it's pushing barely a third of what the Ryzen can do. That's because ray tracing doesn't just hit the GPU, it leans a lot on the CPU too. And our Xeon is not built for that kind of load. And speaking of Spider-Man, both CPUs perform admirably in Marvel Rivals, with both CPUs averaging over 120 FPS. So, what's the verdict? What does this all mean?
Realistically, pairing a 10-year-old system with a modern GPU can't get the job done. In every case, we're above 60 FPS at 1080p. More often than not, we can push up to 1440p and still be above 60 FPS. Sure, it's not going to break any records by any means, but if you're building on a budget and don't mind older hardware, looking into an old workstation PC might be the best option you have.
But above all else, the best hardware is the hardware you have. There's always going to be better parts somewhere out there, so build with what you have and enjoy it.